Welcome to Waycross on Washington. Our special guest today is U.S. Congressman Warren Davidson, serving the Ohio 8th District. And a gentleman that I know very well from working in the chamber world and everything else. Congressman, it's great to see you again.
It's an honor to join you. Thank you.
Waycross Community Media's mission is to connect our viewers to programs and different events that are available to them. Now, to some of our viewers, you are newer to this Hamilton County portion of the district. Could you describe the new portion due to the redistricting?
Yeah, so every decade Congress does a reapportionment of representatives. The census is conducted, and then they basically divide the total population to see how many representatives each state gets. And Ohio, we lost another representative. We went from 16 members of Congress down to 15, and so they had to redraw the districts. And of course, that becomes contentious everywhere. Where are the lines going to be, because that influences who the voters are in a given district. And so in 2018, Ohio did a constitutional amendment that clarified that some major cities can't be split without saying the word Cincinnati. They basically said you can't keep splitting Cincinnati, so that meant all of the city limits had to be in one congressional district. They left that in the 1st congressional district. And then when they looked at, well, how much population did they pick up in the city limits, they basically said, well, kind of roughly the west side. And so what are we going to do with that? And so they just basically moved the 8th district down along the 75 corridor, and everything on the west side that isn't the city limits or Delhi Township is now part of the 8th congressional district.
So I know you're in Hamilton County, but you're also quite a bit in Butler County as well.
Yeah, you have all of Butler County, all Preble County, all Darke County, and then a little portion of Miami County.
Now, talking about your experience, you have been, it's very impressive, you've been an Army Ranger. You've also been in the business sector, which helps you as a U.S. Congressman. If you would talk a little bit about your experience in being in the private sector in business.
Yeah, maybe the Cliff Notes version, Army Ranger business guy. I enlisted in the Army, graduated high school in '88, got to go over to Germany when the wall came down. Those people were not looking for more government. They were looking for more freedom. And pretty cool to see, but my chain of command helped me go to West Point, so that's not the normal way you go to West Point. Got a great education through that, went back as an infantry officer. That's when I served in a Ranger Regiment, served in the Old Guard, served in the 101st Infantry Division down at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and then decided to get out. And, frankly, I thought I'd be a retired, Army guy, and whether as an enlisted soldier or then as an officer later. And, didn't know what I would like. So started looking at all kinds of things in business and looked at manufacturing. And when I was going to get out in the Army, my dad had started a machine shop when I was a senior in high school. So I didn't really grow up around him being a business owner, but he had grown it to, decent size, 20-some people. And he's like, if you're going to get out anyway, you should come work with me. So I told him I'd give him a year, went there and worked for really 2 years, and then started my own company, went to business school at Notre Dame. And, that was a great experience. It helped me grow my business. And at the end of that, I worked out a deal to buy my dad's. That gave him a way to retire, kind of changed the business, reoriented, his business to focus more on production, and, kind of rolled that into the group. And, when I first ran, we started incorporating, businesses I had to kind of step away from, but we had metal stamping and injection molding and the tooling business, and I sold those businesses and then came into Congress. But the experience of running a business was great because you go from a startup essentially past all these phases where you run into hurdles that a lot of them are thrown at you by the government. You got 25 employees, you got 50 employees, 100, and I'm like, why is the government in Washington, D.C. have so much impact on my little, manufacturing company here in Western Ohio? And for a lot of that was bad trade policy. We were getting crushed, and just as we speak, we're talking about U.S. Steel potentially being sold to a Japanese steel company. I think that's a horrible idea. And we had all these challenges where it felt like I wasn't competing against other companies. You're competing against whole countries at times. So, a very competitive space, but we did find a way to grow in manufacturing. And, that's kind of the primary thing that I did in business.
I was always impressed when we took the tours I did not understand what they were talking about. You understood what they were talking about. So it was always impressive on going on the different tours that I took you on for the manufacturing. Let's get to some of the issues that are of concerns to everyone in America and everything else. Part of it is the border and the cartels. What is the status of the House passed bill legislation, H.R. 2?
Yeah, so that was our bill to basically reverse the Biden administration's policies. And frankly, it picked up where we were when President Trump was president. We had what was known as the Goodlatte bill. Chairman Goodlatte was chairman of the Judiciary. And we had, two versions of that bill that we couldn't agree on. We had a hard time getting the consensus. Neither of them passed. Neither of them became law. And I think people have long lamented, if we could have just worked this out, we could have had permanent law, not just executive orders that President Trump had in place on a lot of the policies on border. It deals with who can have a credible asylum claim, how to deal with minors when they show up at the border, and basically remain in Mexico policy, the idea that you release everybody into the United States. They came up with this phrase, catch and release, and it's designed to make people who've ever fished in their life think that you put them back in the water, i.e. you send them out of the country and, we'll let you know when your number's up. And it does just the opposite. It releases people into the United States. And under Joe Biden, the reversal of the way President Trump was doing it, we'll catch you and we'll release you back into Mexico or some other country, wherever you are from, or we'll detain you at the border, but you're not getting turned loose into the America. Biden flipped that on its head, and he's basically turned the border security apparatus into a travel agency dispersing people throughout the country. So, 8+ million people, at the border. And, that's a state that's, I think, a 7th or 8th largest state in the country if they were all in one place. So that's a huge impact. And, the border is not secure in any sense of the imagination. And even the parts that are secure are being corrupted, where they just walk right up and they know they're going to get dispersed throughout the country. We had to deal with that. Our H.R. 2 does it. And then one of the things that I've had is a bill called the Stop the Cartels Act, or is the full name, the Lizzie Murphy Act to Stop the Cartels, named after a young lady in Westchester, 21 years old, took a Xanax at a party. Not a good idea if it's not prescribed to you. It's certainly not. The reason it would be prescribed to you in the first place is to take it at a party, but it was a black market drug. It was laced with fentanyl, and it killed her. And, those kinds of things are happening all over the country. Over 100,000, they label them overdose deaths, but really 70,000 of those 100,000 are really poisonings. The drugs are bad enough in their own right, but, these aren't drugs that kill you. These are poisoned drugs with fentanyl, and the cartels are doing this. And with support from Mexico, no less, and with support from China. And so this is a real problem. It's killing our citizens. And so my bill, the Lizzie Murphy Act to Stop the Cartels, has a lot of its components in this H.R. 2 and several other kinds of policy changes that really would make a difference at our border.
Yeah, the sites you see of the number of people who are crossing the border on every given day, it's truly amazing. Another hot issue is Ukraine. Now, the U.S. has sent billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine over the past 2 years as they're fighting against Russia. What is your particular view on this aid that's being given to Ukraine?
Yeah, I think there are 10 members in the House that have not voted to give any of this money to Ukraine. And as a military guy, we've always said, first pick the mission. And until you tell me what the exact mission is, I can't tell you what resources you even need. And the Biden administration hasn't wanted to be accountable for a mission, even in the most classified settings. They leave it at, well, help Ukraine. Well, help Ukraine do what? And unfortunately, the Deputy Secretary Victoria Nuland, she's defined the mission as regime change in Russia, including war crimes tribunals for Vladimir Putin. Now, that's not an unjust thing. I mean, Vladimir Putin instigated the invasion of Ukraine. It is not a just invasion. There's nothing that Ukraine did to Russia to say Russia should be invading Ukraine. But the problem is Ukraine doesn't have the power to do that. And the only way that you could do that war is essentially World War III. It would involve going to war with Russia. And that's clearly not something that that the American people support and not something I support. So what is it that we're trying to do? And at the end of the day, it's really just making sure that this war doesn't spread to NATO countries. And that could have been done with peace negotiations. Ukraine doesn't have the combat power to kick Russia out of Ukraine. They certainly don't have the combat power to kick Russia out of Ukraine and Crimea. And so this idea of preventing any kind of peace negotiation by giving them weapons and ammunition has made it feel like we're doing something, but what it's really done is it's caused hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides of the war and tens of thousands of fatalities on both sides of the war. And I just personally feel like if that was going to be the outcome, we could have achieved that with no war. And so I think it would be a more just thing to force the negotiation. The resources in a lot of ways have been used to prevent the negotiations.
So as you kick the can down the road a little bit, is there a possible solution that can be reached through Congress of how to deal with Ukraine?
Well, how America deals with Ukraine, sure, but Ukraine and Russia have to work out their own agreement. But in America, our interest, if you think if we spent the money we've sent to Ukraine defeating the cartels, think what a difference that would make for America. And look, the Senate has come up with this idea, frankly, fostered by Joe Biden, that we can work some deal that if you'll just give us the money, more money, another $60+ billion for Ukraine, and we've already sent $113 billion. These aren't all weapons, by the way. The taxpayers of America are funding the pensions of Ukrainian government workers and currently funding their day-to-day operations in their country. So giving this money to Ukraine, if you just give us that, then they'll secure the border. They don't want to deal with H.R. 2, which is our border security bill, but I find it morally offensive to say that to get our president, our own government, to defend our own country, we have to commit to spend $100+ billion to defend another country. I mean, we couldn't get these guys to spend $8 or $10 billion to defend America. And what's even more unbelievable is the Biden administration is not only fostering the illegal immigration in the United States, they're working with foreign governments like Guatemala to prevent them from stopping the flow of migrants into the United States. They have no illusion that they're going to change anything except to continue doing what they did. And they're doing this on purpose, which is they're only going to stop it if we insist. So the idea that we would link it to Ukraine, I think is something that we should avoid.
Another issue that Americans have a difficult time grasping what's going on when we talk about the national debt. Congress raised the debt limit this year. It's my understanding that this included reforms and cuts. Would you explain what's this accomplish and how can you try to pull in the spending that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the debt limit, in essence, a lot of people say that's really just paying for the spending that you already voted on. And some of this got voted on forever. So 70% of the spending, roughly, is on autopilot. Congress doesn't appropriate the money for Social Security. As an example, it's if you're eligible, then that's the money that gets spent. It's not like waiting on Congress to appropriate it. Or take food stamps. It's not like, oh, there's only this many dollars. You better come in and get your food stamps or they're gone. And so we set up a criteria. Anyone who meets that criteria, those food stamps go out. So 70% of our spending is essentially on autopilot. So that part has already been committed. We're going to spend that kind of money. The interest on the debt, we took out a loan, you got to repay at least the interest. And that's the thing. We don't ever pay down the principal. We're only servicing the interest on the debt. And fundamentally, we're spending more money in interest right now than we spend on national security, on defense. So the defense budget's about $850 billion, and we will end up spending over $1 trillion this year in interest. So this is clearly not sustainable. Bankrupt countries are hard to defend and hard to secure. Ultimately, that's how the United States drove the Soviet Union into bankruptcy, as they overspent and bankrupted their country. So that's the thing we confront. If we don't change course, this could happen to us. Now, we're the world's reserve currency, so we're faring better than most other countries. We can get away with these things longer than others can. But the problem with the debt is you can print more money, and that's truly, we were spending more money than the taxes collected are. We're spending more money than anybody will even lend us. And this is where the Federal Reserve's balance sheet has grown. And that's what they'll call, say, printing money. It's not literally sitting there in the printing press cranking it out. It's basically digitally added. But what happens is you can't buy the same amount of stuff with the money. And people are living this. And so in 2020, when they had the economy closed, with the COVID approach, and then they wanted to keep spending more money than anyone would even lend us, I created the Sound Money Caucus to say this is going to cause inflation. And unfortunately, it has in big ways. And so that's why there's no free lunch. Even if you say, well, we can print the money to pay it off, it doesn't buy the same amount of stuff. So it really is hurting folks.
As we move on, we have in 2008, Congress enacted Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA. Now, Congress has been tasked with reauthorizing Section 2 of the FISA. Would you explain this program and what reforms are needed for this to be reauthorized?
Yeah, so FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, we're supposed to spy on the enemies of our country to keep us safe. I mean, this is a major component of the Patriot Act, for example, after 9/11 was expanding. So this was giving powers to our, intelligence and policing authorities to be able to gather information, and the target is supposed to be, foreigners. What we've seen is that access to this information is being weaponized by our own agencies, and they're collecting this information on Americans. The Fourth Amendment says that you're supposed to get a warrant. You have to provide, reasonable suspicion or probable cause. You go to a judge. The executive branch is one of the branches. The judiciary branch is separate, so that provides some sort of check on their power. But what they're doing is they're skipping the whole warrant process. They're just using this information to go after American citizens the same way they would go after, foreign terrorists. And we've seen the FBI in particular use this information to go after a whole host of people that have essentially become political enemies. And there hasn't been enough accountability on that, or frankly, for most people's liking, none effectively. And so they continue to abuse it. So we have to rein it in. A lot of people will say, why would we even have the authority? Well, in a classified setting, the tools are valuable to go after foreigners. We don't want to get rid of that capability, but we do want to narrow the scope to say that you can't go after American citizens without getting a warrant, and that if you do that, then you can actually be prosecuted. So that's the thing. People are like, when is somebody going to jail? We know what was done. It's been hard to see that accountability happen. And unless we reform it and have those kind of countermeasures put in place, I think we're going to look at agencies that continue to abuse it.
Another major issue that's right across the entire country is crime. Now, crime is no longer just in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, the big cities. You're seeing it in almost everywhere. You're seeing it in shopping centers. You're seeing crime going everywhere. Gun control is always a hot issue. Where do you stand on gun control?
Gun control is aiming at what you intend to hit with a gun and hitting it. I learned that as a kid, but got trained professionally in the military. What people mean by it, though, is essentially we want to let the government choose who can have a gun, under what terms and conditions can have a gun, and we're going to be a filter so that we will decide who gets this constitutional right. Now, the Constitution says in the Second Amendment that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and it doesn't say keep and store them. It says keep and bear them. And so thankfully, Ohio's legislature's finally caught up to the Second Amendment, and that's the standard in Ohio. And frankly, firearms are used defensively to keep people safe because the police can't be everywhere, and for a whole host of other reasons. Self-defense is an inherent part of the right to life. So as to the crime isn't high because you and I can own guns. The crime is high because the culture has tolerated criminal behavior, and we've got prosecutors in parts of the country that won't even prosecute crime, but we've got judges even next to us here in Hamilton County that aren't holding people accountable for committing crime. And so this idea that you're going to effectively catch and release criminals, no bail, long trials, soft sentences, it fosters a culture of criminal activity. And look, we're holding on to the prosecutor's office with prosecutors that will prosecute crime. I think Melissa Powers is doing a great job over there, and I hope she gets to continue doing that job because we know she's going to prosecute crime. But we've seen some of the prosecutors get elected in jurisdictions around the country where the prosecutor won't even bring the case against the criminals. But what are they doing? They're reinforcing this politicization of the law to go after political opponents. I mean, this is like third world stuff. We have to keep it focused on basic crime and law enforcement. And look, last thing I'll say on this is it has to be one of the dumbest ideas in political history is to say, let's defund the police. I mean, who wants the police defunded? Well, the criminals are all for defunding the police, but the people that want to live in safe communities, they certainly want police. They want good cops. They want cops that are accountable for obeying and following and enforcing the law, but they want them there so that they don't have a tolerance for crime.
We're visiting with U.S. Congressman Warren Davidson, serving the Ohio's 8th District on Waycross on Washington. Inflation, and as I was doing research on your district, it was very interesting, the population in terms of voters from 25 all the way up. And you have a significant number in my age group, the senior citizens. Now, the concern here is senior citizens are feeling the crunch on inflation. You go to the grocery store, what we could buy a year ago is much higher now. Gas is high. Across the board, things are higher. We are concerned about programs that are for the senior citizens. What about the Social Security? What about Medicare? What direction are they headed in?
Yeah, I mean, they're not headed in a great direction. They're not solvent. They weren't structured smartly in the first place. But that's not the fault of senior citizens. That's the fault of government. If you think about a company, if they launch a defective product, hey, it's not my fault you launched a defective product. You made the promise. You have to honor the commitment to the people that you sold the product to. Now, that might mean you have to, lose money for a while on that product, but you're not going to commit fraud. You're going to honor the commitment you made, and that's where our government is. They have to deliver on the promise they made to our seniors. But now they're foolish if they don't look at it and go, the way it's going, this thing's bankrupting the system that was designed to fund it. They're basically having to pull cash in from elsewhere to keep propping it up. Let's structure it in a smart way for future beneficiaries. So if you've got, you pick your age, 25, whatever young person age, the deal for them saying, how do you retire? What kind of money gets withheld from your paycheck? Should there be a cap on earnings? All those things have to be on the table so that for a future generation, you're not really putting them at risk of failing to deliver. The only way to meet our promises to our seniors is we do what we said we would do, which means they're going to have that benefit there. And if we have to borrow money, well, then so be it. We have to, because you can't fail to deliver on that. And frankly, if you did, what can most of these seniors do? They're not at a position where they can go back and really fully engage in the economy on a wide scale. Certainly some of them can. Some folks have offered this idea, well, we should means test Social Security. No, that wasn't the deal. The deal was you put this money in and you can count on it being there for your retirement. And a lot of people who did save, they saved with the idea that I would have this portion of income available in my retirement years. So, I think that's where it is. Last thing on that with inflation, the government understates inflation all the time. It's, quote, good politics. It might sound good in a soundbite, but where that has consequences, especially for people on fixed income and pensions, if the government tells you that over the past few years, inflation's only been, 3 or 4%, that's just not honest. Everyone knows, hey, my prices since 2020 have gone up, 15, 20%. For the things that you need to live. And a lot of times they'll say, well, except for food and healthcare and housing, right? Yeah, I don't need to cover any of those in my life. Yeah, everyone does, so that's where you have to count it. They throw these bogus economic stats out and they downplay it. And the people that are most hurt by that dishonesty are seniors.
As a United States Congressman, you bring a very unique perspective to, and also being an ex-Army Ranger. Strengthen our national defense. Are we doing everything we can, in your viewpoint, in order to strengthen our national defense? Where are we today?
It's a painful topic, Kurt. I mean, really, I enlisted in the Army in the height of the Cold War. Reagan had really created a mindset that we were going to defeat the Soviets, and we did. Not because we actually confronted them in a hot war. Frankly, Mr. Gorbachev didn't tear down the wall. America didn't tear down the wall. The people did. They found out the truth and they took it down on their own. But the surest way to a peaceful country is to have a strong country. Joe Biden's weak. Our enemies have seen that he's weak, and they've taken advantage of it. When President Trump was in office, we didn't launch new wars because his diplomacy was effective. People believed that he would be a strong leader and he would confront problems. And people were concerned with Reagan because he, talked a tough game and would have delivered on it. And people were concerned with Trump because he talked a tough game and would have delivered on it. But the fact that they would have provided the sufficient deterrence. The big problem is no matter who's president, the people that have to deliver it have to have the resources they need to do it, and they have to have the training and mindset to do it. And look, I don't want to pick on people. I love them, but I will just tell you that the purple hair pronoun people are not going to be the ones that defend our country. They get all kinds of stuff that they need to work through and deal with in their own lives. Active duty military is not the place to do that. The military exists to fight and win wars. That's it. Hopefully we avoid them. The State Department's job is to get us out of wars, not find ways to get us into more. The current State Department needs fixed too. But that whole national security mindset, that's where I say, define the mission. What is it that we're trying to do? And heck, these guys are out there saying with one voice, whether it's Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, or Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, that the biggest threat to national security is climate change. These guys are freaking insane. Their job is not to fight climate change. We got people in the government that are working on that. Their job is to keep our country secure from physical threats, and frankly, increasingly from cybersecurity threats. So, they're not focused properly, and to stay focused right now would require them to get focused in the first place, and that's across the whole national security apparatus. And that's going to take more than just spending. It's going to take a mindset change from the way that things have been run for a long time.
Well, as a non-expert of anything or everything, I should say, cybersecurity is one of the scariest things because you're finding out almost monthly that a particular company that you've done business with, they have been breached, and your information is out there. You're seeing what Russia has done. You've seen what China has done. Cybersecurity, is enough being done by the United States government in your viewpoint as Congressman?
Absolutely not. And unfortunately, Congress has spent more money on this, but they haven't provided much focus or accountability either. They created CISA, which is Cyber Security Information Systems, whatever. CISA, I forget the acronym, but it's part of the Homeland Security Department. But their job is to kind of coordinate these activities across the whole of government approach. And for the most part, Congress has just said, yeah, you should, this is really important, here's a bunch of money. And they haven't provided oversight and accountability. But when you look at what was going on with the weaponized government, some of these same agencies, CISA, for example, was using part of this disinformation governance board. They were working with the FBI and tech companies to try to silence free speech. And people thought, oh, that surely that isn't going on. And Elon Musk bought Twitter. I mean, as my friend across the river, Thomas Massey, said, Elon Musk bought a crime scene. You could see what was going on here was a criminal violation of First Amendment free speech, and they were using the whole of government approach, whether it was the FBI or cybersecurity, to target disfavored speech. And as it turns out, in a lot of cases, the truth about whether it was COVID or you name it, they were silencing people that were dissenting from, the quote approved political narrative, even if it was true. And it goes back to the weaponization of government. Instead of focusing on the core mission of keeping our cyberspace safe and secure, protecting our critical infrastructure, providing a resource to companies that they might have to defend their storefronts against crime locally, but they don't have to defend against foreign governments or transnational criminal enterprises. The federal government is supposed to do those things, and they're not doing it.
Infrastructure in the United States, bridges, roads, highways, whatever else, it's been a major issue. There's been some funding. How much of this should be the responsibility of the states, and how much should the federal government be involved in that?
Yeah, great question. So, infrastructure is really important for the development of any economy, and it's been part of the whole story of America. The idea that we would, heck, Marbury versus Madison, one of the first Supreme Court cases, was about a bridge over a river in Boston, and who could collect tolls and who could build bridges and what were the terms of the contract, and it essentially became contract law. But it was about an infrastructure project. As we settled the country and built roads, we moved that to railroads, and that defined a lot of the westward expansion. The fact that we have, both the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, massive seaports, has really made us a navy as much as we are a landmass that provides shipping access all over the world. And so the infrastructure to do that, America invented the airplane and aviation and aerospace. We're dominant in space. We're dominant in all of this technology. And one of the things post-World War, one of my favorite presidents was Dwight Eisenhower, the interstate highway system. And that took to a massive scale the idea that we had U.S. highways, US 50, US 127, things like that, and built a much more sophisticated road network that truly had, in the lessons learned from World War II, critical infrastructure improvements for, in the event we did have a national security risk. But it massively developed our economy. So the importance of infrastructure is hard to state, and the clear legacy is there is a federal role there, but it's not the only role. And so when you look at local government, for example, who provides clean drinking water and sanitary conditions for the disposal of waste and trash services? Well, historically, that's been the most local form of government. But the Biden administration, wants to replace all the pipes for water everywhere in the world. Well, that takes the burden off of the local community to take care of their own infrastructure. Flint, Michigan was tragic, but whose fault is that? It's Flint, Michigan's fault. And frankly, their county agreed, because the county didn't bail out Flint, Michigan. The state of Michigan didn't bail out Flint, Michigan. It went to the problem where the federal government bailed out Flint, Michigan. And now, if there's no responsibility at the local level to take care of your own infrastructure at the most fundamental level, then everything becomes a federal problem, and the federal government's broke. We already talked about that, and it does relieve the stress on local budgets, but it doesn't necessarily allocate the resources the right way.
Well, as you know, under Dwight Eisenhower, from 1952 through 1960, the highways all across America were built up. The suburbs became a result of that. People were not living in the city as much. They moved out. The GIs came back. They were building homes. So that was a very prosperous time in the United States. One other thing that is a concern, every American says, yes, we like to help with the climate control issue and everything. But when you take a look at your monthly bill that you get from Duke Energy or whomever it may be, the bills are higher. High energy costs right now is really hurting Americans. It's hurting my household, other households. Is there an answer to that?
Yeah, a lot of this is a result of policy choices and policy shifts. You look, the Biden administration, their first executive orders were on energy. They made it harder to produce domestic energy. And if you look, the demand is for massively more domestic energy, particularly if they want to make all of cars electric. But power generation has become increasingly harder. So we mentioned H.R. 2, that was our border security and immigration bill. Actually, what we called H.R. 1 was energy. And, the foundation for a lot of America's growth really has been, we've had massive amount of energy resources in the United States. And, go back to Barack Obama. He said, well, it's not going to be illegal to operate, coal-fired electric plant, but we'll just bankrupt you if you do. And if you think about coal, coal's like a battery. It stores energy. You use it, you release it. People say, oh, we have to ban coal. You really want to ban steel? I mean, you can't make steel if you don't have coal. So people say, well, let's get rid of the fossil fuels. We don't need the petrochemical industry. You realize how much stuff comes out of that? I mean, your clothes are made out of chemicals. Your medicine's made out of chemicals. Obviously, plastic things are made out of chemicals. But, you know, that comes as part of the refining process where we extract high energy producing fuel, whether that's in natural gas, you know, gasoline, diesel, heating oil. All these kinds of things are available in the right tiers of the market. And we've got central planners in Washington, D.C. basically saying, we're going to get rid of all that. We're going to replace it with sunshine and windmills. And they're subsidizing people to put solar panels over top of fertile farm ground, which makes no sense whatsoever. So we need to get less government and more freedom in this space in particular.
Congressman, I thank you so very much for being with us. This has been Waycross on Washington with U.S. Congressman Warren Davidson, serving the Ohio's 8th District. I'm Kert Radel, Waycross Community Media, Government Programming Coordinator. Thank you for joining us.